take up any more of Steve's time to share with us tonight. So if Damien does not come, we are going to stay afterwards and go over our ballots, because there are some other measures on there to vote on. There's some constitutional amendments to the Wyoming Constitution and some taxes. So if you want to be a part of that discussion, you're welcome to stay, and we'll just sit at the back and do a roundtable discussion on those. Everything's the same as usual. There's brownies and water if anybody wants to get a snack while we're meeting. Bathrooms are just through the double doors there on the left. It's all very casual, so just be comfortable, but remain respectful. It's funny that we're starting late because I always say this is like if I had you over to my house. Well, everything runs late at my house, so apparently it's my house. So without any other delay, we'll go ahead and get started, and Steve will have about 5 or 10 minutes with it, however much he needs to introduce himself and why he's running, and then we'll open it up to questions. I do have a microphone to bring to you if you have a question to ask, because we need to be able to hear it so we know what he's answering, okay? And then we'll stop around 6:30-ish, depending on if we hear from Damien or not, okay? I'll pray and we'll get started. Lord, thank you for getting us here, even though it'd be late for some of us. And thank you that Steve is here and that he is trying to find a way to serve and to help, and we ask that you would equip him with great clarity and focus to tell us what we need to know, and help us to have great wisdom and discernment to ask him the things that need to be asked, and that you would guide this conversation, that it would be honoring to you, and that it would accomplish your good work and good deed in our community. And thank you again for letting us all live here in this town, in this county, in this state, in this country, that we get to have this opportunity and be this close to our candidates and get to know them. And it's in Jesus' name we pray, amen. Very good.
Do they need this for the audio?
Yes.
Okay. Normally I don't need a microphone because I'm pretty loud, so if I'm yelling, I apologize in advance. So my name's Steve Tremaine. I'm running for Sheridan School District number 2. A little bit about myself, kind of a background so you get to know me. I moved here a little over 4 years ago from the West Coast. I have 4 kids. They're all grown out on their own. Thank goodness they're successful and they haven't come back. We moved here for a variety of different reasons. Mainly it was a business move, and leaving the West Coast was interesting. Over a span of 30 years, I saw constant decline and decay in the schools there. When I was raising my kids, this would be back in the 90s, they were going to public school and really not learning anything. I actually went to speak with the teachers, and at one point in time, the teacher looked at me and said, "Mr. Tremaine, are you telling me how to do my job?" And at the end of the day, I said, "I guess I am, and I'm not going to be able to change how you're doing your job." So I ended up pulling my kids out of public school and putting them into a private Christian school. I did that from kindergarten through 6th grade. And then after that, I put them back into middle school in the public sector again, so that they could interact with peers and see the social norms that are going on. But I gave them a good foundation to be successful, and they've all been successful. The unfortunate thing was having to do that. Over the course of time, they went to universities, got some liberal indoctrination, but they still had a good foundation from which to judge and make critical decisions. As time went on and we moved over to here, it was thrilling. We were so happy and blessed to be here in Wyoming, particularly in Sheridan. It's a fantastic town, great community. People often ask us, how do we like Wyoming? My wife and I always say we wouldn't want to be anywhere else, especially at this time and age. It's a wonderful state with wonderful people. The values here reflected the values that I have, the values that my wife has. We believe in basically conservative principles, individual liberties, with a solid moral background from which to make your decisions. I was working for many years here, and over time when COVID came about, the stories of my colleagues and peers and their children's and the reaction of the school board and how they addressed the parents and the decisions that they were made was appalling to me, frankly. And as time went on and the COVID relaxed, and then mask mandates came down and the state, was recovering. Again, there was more mask mandates and a lot of vitriol between parents and the school board. As I decided to run for candidate, I did a little bit of research. What is the foundation the school board is holding in their principles, in their heart, as they don't listen to parents and don't hold open forums? One of the areas that I looked at was, and actually got pointed to by the current executive on the committee, was the policies and the procedures and how they guide the school district. So I want to take a second and read one of the policies here, just a paragraph of it, if I can. That's why I got these notes. Don't memorize it. But it's in their non-discrimination policy, and it's kind of riddled throughout the policies, and if you haven't looked at them, it's about 70, 80 pages. In fact, they just amended it recently. But basically, in their non-discrimination policy, one paragraph says, the school staff should establish and maintain an atmosphere in which students can develop attitudes and skills for effective cooperative living, including respect for the individual regardless of economic status, intellectual ability, race, color, national origin, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity, transgender status, age, disability, or religion. Another line reads, respect for the rights of others to seek and maintain their own identities. Now, what they point here is Wyoming state law, federal law. I don't think a lot of that is in either of those laws. This is wholly made from cut cloth that they made up because they have a political agenda. This is the crap that I left on the West Coast, which is why I decided to run for the school district too. The policies that they point to are how they make their decisions, and they often say, well, a policy board has guided us and said we have to do this. That's passing the buck. The school board ultimately decides the policy. We need to look at the policies from which we're making our decisions for our kids, because as time goes on, the problems that we're going to see, that we're seeing nationally with our news, with transgenderism, with men in sports, with pronouns, with identity, is going to come here. And we have to have a school board that has common sense, a logical framework, and puts in policies that pushes back on the fringe. It's silly to have 1 or 2% of the population of the United States running the rest of the 98%. That's how I feel. That's why I decided to run for school district number 2. So, a bit about me, and a bit about my background and my thoughts on how things are running. There are a couple of candidates that are running that are incumbents. Waddell and Perkins, I believe. If they are re-elected, you're going to have more of the same. There's 4 seats open, 14 candidates, right? If we get all 4 candidates with common sense, they're still going to have to battle the 5 remaining. It's not a slam dunk. If we get the right candidates, things will change. But gosh darn it, if you get the right people, we'll fight tooth and nail to make this the right school district with a good educational program that doesn't allow CRT or 1619 or any other of these fringe theories creeping into Sheridan. And that's why I'm running. There you go. Questions?
What was your business background?
So,
Education background?
Right, education background. So I'm a degreed engineer. I'm an electrical engineer. Got a bachelor's of science in Cal Poly in San Luis Obispo. I got a master's of science at Washington State University, and I got an MBA at Oregon State University. I worked as a design engineer, worked in manufacturing, worked in product development for about 15 years, moved into finance, and been a finance executive for the last 15, 20 years.
Thank you.
On that note, I have a question about finance. Do you know of a way, or how would you work towards helping the district be more financially viable and independent of federal money and even state money that would have strings attached to it, that would go against the things that you're saying, that would push those fringe ideas. If we said no, the first response is, if we say no, we'll not have money to function. So how would you work against that financial weakness?
Great question. I oppose federal money with strings attached, and usually when you got lunch programs or anything else that's coming down, there are all sorts of strings attached, so I oppose that. We're not short money in the state. We have plenty of money for education. We are spending over $14,000. They did a budget review. Back of the envelope, I calculated 16, but it's between $14,000 and $16,000 per student. Per student. Class sizes in the Constitution is, I think the target was 14 or 16, one of the two. So it's a low number, but still, if you take 14 and multiply it by that 4,000, that's plenty of money, $96,000 per class. Now, not only get to pay staff, bus drivers, administrators, and whatnot, but what you're going to have to do is not take the strings attached money, rather work with the funds that we have, work with the state to make sure we're properly funded, and then decide and prioritize how we're going to spend that money. I'm probably the oldest candidate running for this office. You know, I can remember gas lines, I can remember Carter, hyperinflation, right? I can remember the second worst president of the United States. We got the first one right now. So I remember that. I remember having inflation where your grocery bill goes up. It's going to hit the school district. If they stay flat in the budget, we're going to have to figure out how to deal with the amount of money we have and make the right prioritizations within the school district. And a question similar to this was asked at the forum at the YO Theater. And the answer from Ms. Waddell was, hey, we went through and the audit said everything was perfect. We were the first one to get done. Well, great. 1 + 1 = 2. So what? It doesn't say anything about where that's money being spent and how you're spending it. You're going to have to go through the budget and prioritize it to make sure it's spent in the right areas at the right time effectively.
Hi, Steve. Harry. I want to capitalize on that question a little bit. One of the things that I know is that the school district isn't talking about is the wastefulness of spending. And as an example, if you take a child out of their school district, that empty seat will still receive funds for 3 years in a declining scale. Okay? If elected, what will you do to see a change if you don't agree with it? And then it's also my opinion that if you can create some change with that, you can also actually help with the strings attached monies from the federal government, and you can also help lower property taxes because 60% of your property tax goes towards the school districts. So I'd like your take on that.
Yeah, so, you know, moved here, frankly, the property taxes here were a whole lot better than they were from where I came from on the West Coast. But they're still increasing rapidly. On a percentage basis, they've been astronomical, way faster than on the West Coast. Frankly, faster than you'll see in Washington, California, Oregon, because they have property tax limitations and caps. So we don't have that here. So you're absolutely right. The money goes down the state, it gets then reapportioned. The fighting of the property taxes and the increases there, that's going to be a state issue. We're going to need to get representatives and people in the legislature that are going to have to deal with that and fight that. We need to do that because it's taxing people out of their homes. For the money that's allocated to the schools, again, it's prorated on the student, whether they're full-time or part-time. If you got homeschoolers coming in, there's a certain amount of money. As you mentioned, if children leave, it declines over time. All that funding has to be used effectively. And in fact, I think right now there's, I believe, a $5 million surplus that's been put away into the kitty. And so I don't want to continue to draw more than necessary, but I do want to make sure that the funds are allocated or spent wisely. And if we have excess funds, then we put those away for a rainy day or use them for special purposes when things do go sideways. What I don't want to do is get into a fight with the legislature. I want the legislature to tackle the property taxes. I will encourage them to lower it. I'll encourage them to make sure that they are not filling vacant administration seats or paying for vacant administration seats or paying for positions that are not filled. That's absolutely a waste of money, and it goes to the school and it can be squandered too easily. Again, that money is our money, and we need to spend it wisely to make sure that we're getting the best education for our children possible. So it's a bit of a non-answer because I can't control the legislature, but what I can do is with the funds, make sure that we're focused correctly on the curriculum, putting it into the school district properly, educating the kids properly, getting them out the door to high schools or trade schools or colleges or where they want to go, and they're properly prepared for life. If there's excess funds, put it away and let the legislature work on the property tax issue.
Okay, I'm gonna keep going on the money thing then.
Go for it.
I've wondered this, and I don't know if you know the answer. If the state legislature continued to spend money for education to the levels that they are, and I know that there's already a battle about the cuts that they've made and the WEA filing that lawsuit. However, is it possible, and if so, would you do so, for a district to decline the amount allocated to them, not in total, but to say this is far above and beyond what we need, and we're only gonna take what we need plus maybe a little for savings or something like that, if you're running the district a little more carefully as you're describing, of really watching the budget?
Yeah, it's a lot like a business. I mean, you have a certain budget, you need to stay within the budget. There's unanticipated expenses that you'll have to deal with. But at the end of the day, we don't necessarily need more than what the school district requires. So if we can pair things to the right level, what I would do is take that money and then I'd illustrate to the legislature, here's the excess, here's how we've done it. You can take that information and apply it to other school districts, and then they can turn around and decide what the property tax appropriateness is, and then allocate that across the state. I would rather learn from ourselves and from partner school districts how to do things efficiently and not just be the biggest pig at the trough trying to get as much money as possible out of the state. The state's got limited resources as well. We had a ton of COVID money in here. It's probably been spent on a lot of things besides COVID, but frankly, it also got wasted on COVID. And that money should have been put aside for other things that would be much more useful.
Non-financial question. If the school board should provide oversight for the curriculum for the various grades, and if you think that should be done, how should the school board provide that oversight for the specifics in the curriculum that are taught in, say, K through 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12? How do you actually see the specifics and find out what's actually being taught?
Multi-pronged approach. First off, I mentioned the policies. The policies got to get updated so that there's a guide structure for teachers and staff. This is what the school district believes, and this is the policies that we're going to follow as a community and as a school district. That's number one. Number two is the school board's going to have to be engaged with the teachers. Not necessarily going in and monitoring the first grade or second grade, but engage with the teachers and find out what the problems are, where their challenges are, what are some of the best curriculums in K through 6, so on in middle school and so on in high school, and try to take that and emulate, particularly in grade schools, across the other schools. But at the end of the day, the parents are the closest people to seeing what is happening with the children. If they have an issue with a lack of learning or with what's being taught or how it's being taught, they need to bring that up and go up to the teacher and the principal, but ultimately it lands in the school board, and the school board needs to say, the parents are right, change how you're teaching and guide the teacher back towards what we want to see taught and how we want it taught. You can ask a math question a lot of different ways. And so how you ask the question, you still get the answer in math, but the framework with how it's asked can be very telling. And I don't want to get into specifics, but you can imagine I can do all sorts of mathematical questions or reading questions or literature questions or writing questions that are very leading and I think just not appropriate to have in school. And we're seeing it across the nation. So there's I guess the third rail is there's been conversations about books, and some books are appropriate, some books are not appropriate. At the end of the day, the school board is not going to read every book in the school district. There's not enough bandwidth. Again, parents are going to see the books that are being brought in. But if you brought in a book on supporting, pull it out there, identity, my identity is a cat, and that's what you want to have the children read. Well, I think the parents probably say, that's not proper, and push that back up. And again, the school board needs to have the guts to say, no, it's not proper. Go back to reading, Tom Sawyer or whatever is the appropriate literature that's going to get the same outcome in terms of education without the political slanting. That's the fundamental problem that I see is happening in the U.S. is we're moving away from the 3 R's and into social political education, and that I oppose.
Do you want to ask a question for your sister?
No.
I'll ask it for her then. Someone who regularly attends is not here this evening, and a question that she has asked all along is, what is your opinion, and what would be how would you handle it as a school board member to deal with gender and sports and locker rooms and bathrooms that we're dealing with now?
Yep, another great question. So the sex you are is what's on your birth certificate. And that's the way it is through high school. If you want to change it, then do it after you're 18 and out of public school. From my point of view, women's sports are women's sports, male sports are male sports. If there's intramurals or co-sports, that's fine. But if there's women's swimming and men's swimming, there's just separate teams. That's how it's set up. Locker rooms, men, women, what's on your birth certificate? That's what it is. I don't care what you identify as, which again, I'll point to those policies, allows anybody to decide what the heck they are on any day, which is ridiculous. So I oppose that. I oppose CRT, and I oppose the 1619, which is redefining the United States and has its roots in socialism.
Hi, Steve. Again, thank you for coming here tonight. It means an awful lot to people that you're willing to sit there for a long form interview and give more than a 45-second answer. My question for you is, if elected, would you see yourself primarily as a representative of the community or as a representative of the school system? Some start off seeing themselves as community reps, but experience pressure to be spokespeople and advocates for the district in the end. And so the question is where would your priority lie? The community or defending the decisions of the district?
So just recently in the Sheridan Press, I saw that they updated a whole bunch of policies, and I think Nancy Stevens went to the board meeting and said, hey, we didn't get a chance to have any input in the policies, and their answer was, well, it went through the subcommittee of 14 people that are a bunch of different representatives, and then the superintendent, and then our executive committee, which is held in closed session, and yeah, we all like it. So, and it was on Google, you can go, it was on their notes. Well, you gotta go through 3 different hyperlinks through Google Drive to figure out what it is, and when you finally get to it, the document's so redlined you can't see what the old wording is, and the new wording is no better. So it almost appears like the school board is on its last legs trying to jam things into the community so that they can perpetuate the problem. So the answer is, I support the community. The community the school board needs to be a reflection of the community and the values of the community. Anything less is a travesty. We're paying for it, for gosh sakes. So I am not going to be an advocate for the status quo or for the school board association or for any of those organizations. I'm an advocate for the community. That doesn't mean that all voices are necessarily going to dictate the policy. You can have one person that's very vocal about, hey, my daughter wants to be a boy and wants to go to the locker room. I'm going to oppose that. I'm sorry. But in general, I'll take the opinions of the community and try to bring that into the school board. Bring common sense and logic back to the board. The other thing I like to see is the executive sessions basically disbanded unless it's an executive session discussion, such as legal issues, personnel issues, those kind of things, where you got disciplinary problems or individual people that might be named. that shouldn't be in the public, but everything else should be. It should be transparent. If they're gonna change all the policies, where were those 9 board members? What were the discussions? What were the results, and what did they feel? Why do they want to change them? That was all done in the dark of night, from my opinion. At the end of the day, having more transparency, more open discussion is valuable, and I think the input from the community is valuable, but we are electing people on the school board that are going to ultimately have to make the decision and make the best decision grounded on what the community wants.
All right, I got a couple questions. I'm trying to think which one I should ask you. And actually, it was last month's board meeting. There were 12 policies. First read, second read, that they rubber stamped. And you're right, they do this at their luncheons, which are supposed to be their study sessions, and they're supposed to be open to the public, and they're not. Something that does need to be changed, by the way. But let me go on to the question. So this year, 2022-2023 school session, District Number 2 has changed their way of interpreting how much time teachers have to do core subject and how much time they have to do things like PBIS, Positive Behavioral Instructional System, or intervention system, or social emotional learning, or social emotional education, depending on how you hear it said. And for instance, at the junior high, there are, they lengthened the school day by 5 minutes, they shortened the passing period by a minute, and then they added a 15-minute, what they call Bronco base camp at the beginning of school. And in that Bronco base camp, kids are asked from a number of 1 to 10, how are you? They're asked a specific question of the day, and they're basically encouraged, and I'll use that word loosely, to befriend the other students in that room with them and learn to be nice. And then throughout the day, in other classes, they are reinforced the PBIS or SEL in spot checks, constantly telling the kids to be nice and behave and this and that. What are your thoughts on that? And then in relation to that, there's a lot of problems with, I think the media, and you might see it on social media where the kids are calling it, or parents are calling, furries. And their definition of it is kids are having tails and ears, and they're scribbling on their face, and they're meowing and barking, and they're doing this in the halls and in the classrooms and things like that, which is a big distraction. What are your thoughts on that, and what would you do to change it?
Well, if we're gonna take time away from moving between classes and add a few more minutes to the day, then it ought to be for learning. I don't think we need to go through the emotional kumbayas. Teachers have a pretty good handle on the kids in their class just by their behavior. They get to know them, their small class sizes, for heaven's sakes. I think that the understanding if there's a child at risk or problems at home is gonna be evident. We don't need to have pre-meetings to do that. So I don't agree with that. I also think that this gets back into identity. If somebody identifies as a cat, I guess then they can demand a litter box in every school, every class they attend. It's ridiculous. That gets back into the tail wagging the dog here. We've got 2% or less of the population making a mockery of the whole thing. So we need to get back to the core subjects. If the kids are meowing and barking and everything else, they need to be warned. If doesn't work, they get suspended and follow back to the principles of you're here to learn, to educate, to grow socially, to grow emotionally, but we are not a bunch of camp counselors putting up with this stuff.
Another question from somebody who was not here this evening, but has been asked of almost all of the candidates thus far. How would you be more specific and intentional about executing solutions to bullying, and in that answer include the use of cell phones by kids and carrying these cell phones in the schools throughout the day.
Yeah, so at workplaces, usually it's leave your cell phone in the locker, right? Or if you're taking it, stay off your cell phone. In class, it's gotta be a gigantic distraction. When my daughter was in, I don't know what, grade school, there were little electronic pets that were on their waist or whatever, and they were constantly fiddling with it. And the teacher, hey, I don't care if the pet cat's off. She's here to learn, put it, away. They can put it in the locker and keep it there, and they can pull it out at lunch, and they can put it back in when they go back into class. So first of all, I don't think electronic devices in the school is helpful. They're there to learn. I also don't think we need to teach electronically. I like to see, more books, less iPads, that kind of stuff. But that's me. In terms of how do you manage social bullying, this gets back into parents having to be cognizant of what their kids are doing on the social media. Kids are kids, and they're going to be mean. Some of the most mean people I ever knew were peers of my daughter, who they picked on electronically in that as it got into high school and then cell phones. In fact, I wouldn't even let my kids have cell phones until they got into high school. So the parents are going to have to step up here too. The school board can't solve every ill of society. Parents need to step up and be responsible for their kids. They need to monitor what their kids are doing electronically on the computers and on cell phones. Frankly, it's a big problem. It creates emotional problems. Bullying electronically is probably worse than at the school. If you see it at school, an adult can step in. If there's bullying at the school, again, adults going to have to step in, but there needs to be some discussion with both the bully's parents as well as a person on the other end of that, and get the parents to understand this is not appropriate behavior. One's going to end up getting kicked out of school or sent home for a week, and the other is going to need to learn how to fight, I guess.
To add to the bullying question, it's also taking place by the school board to the parents, in my opinion, and also from the teachers to the students. How would you handle that?
So there's no way in God's green earth I'm going to disrespect parents. We need to listen to the parents. We're not going to answer everything right there and then in the public forum. But to disrespect parents and shut them down and saying, we're the elected officials, do as I say. That's what they're not king, they're not God, they're not going to be, in my opinion, that's why I'm running. They do not have that power. They need to listen to the parents, and they need to consider, if they do something different, explain it. And explain it publicly, and explain it to the parents, explain it to the community why this decision was made. And at the end of the day, if the parents don't like it, then vote them out. And that's why I want those two incumbents out.
I think it's quite nice everybody keeps letting me ask all your questions, because I usually sometimes don't get to ask them what I want to ask. Never mind them.
I know, we can't be too nice here. You had mentioned earlier about a solid moral background.
Mm-hmm.
Would you explain to us maybe more in depth? Some people are driven by beliefs or standards or things that are important to them. Tell us what's important to you.
That's a nice question. Actually, thank you.
I stole it.
That's great. So I always believe in the golden rule, treat others as you want to be treated, right? I work to enrich other people to the extent that I can, to create opportunities for them. I want the schools to do the same for our children. Not everybody is created equal. And some people will need additional assistance, some people need accelerated classes, some people need help reading, or they just don't get math. I got math, but I couldn't draw a straight line if you paid me. Nobody can read my handwriting. You wouldn't want me as the poet or the literator, the laureate. So my background is really based on treat others well, do what God would want you to do, be kind to others, stand your ground for principles and morals, and really it's the foundation of the country and of the community that we as a collective bond, hold dear. And don't let those decay bit by bit by bit. I've seen it, I've fought it, and I'll do what I can do to prevent it from happening. So, God, country, that's where I come from.
This is pretty much another financial question, but I think there's some morality involved in it as well. The state currently has 4 or 5, I always lose count, virtual school options. The way those function is every student in the state is eligible to participate in those programs. But those programs are specific to a district. So for example, the Wyoming Cowboy Academy is out of District 1, based out of the Bighorn schools. So if any child in the state enrolls in that program, their ADM dollars from the state go to the Bighorn district at that district's rate. Some of these programs are in districts where their ADM dollars are $22,000 and higher per child. How is that a good thing or is it not a good thing? And I know the current board would like to start a virtual program here. Do you think that they should move forward with that or not?
So let me give you a bit about my background. When I was getting a master's degree in electrical engineering, I took courses, this is way back when, before they had not chat rooms, but the video conferencing. It was courses that were on tape, and they would send the tape, and I'd watch the VS tape, and and that was the virtual learning. And so some of them were very good. You always had to talk with the professor or the teacher to get more information or answer questions that weren't well explained or if you didn't understand the topic. Virtual learning it works, but it doesn't really work well, in my opinion. It doesn't work as well as being in the class. So for core classes, I like to see in-person learning, not virtual, in-person. For the other classes that might be out of the ordinary that a school district can't afford, maybe it's Japanese or maybe it's Portuguese or something like that, then that's fine. I think those are enhancements to the curriculum, and I like to see that opportunity using technology appropriately. In terms of the dollars following it, if the one district is putting it on and they are getting additional funds for a course above and beyond the normal amount, fine, because they're incurring the cost to teach Japanese or Portuguese. But I would not want to see the base amount dropped. In other words, if they get $14,000 and change per student, then that student's money needs to stay in their home state where they're getting the basic education in classes. Anything above and beyond that, if they pay for it or if the state's paying for it, then it could go to the other district. It seems fair to me because they're having to pay the professor to do that. But fundamentally, I like to see in-person learning, not remote learning, especially for core curriculums.
So with that being said, all of these programs are full programs where all of the students' classes are online and done online. Would you then not want to have one of those programs started in SCSD2? Or would you maybe do some kind of hybrid or something like that?
Maybe a hybrid. I'd rather see small steps into it to see how it goes, but fundamentally, I don't want remote learning as a core for, English and math and social studies and government studies, and the core curriculum needs to be on site. If they're trying to allow it for children that are disabled or people that just can't make it for one reason or another, that's one thing. But at the end of the day, no, I oppose having remote learning for children. It doesn't work that well. They just don't learn that much.
Okay, we have time for one, maybe 2 questions, depending on the length of it. Anybody else? Or go? Okay, I'm gonna give you the last one. was kind of the rub and the fight that started with the pandemic came back to and boiled down to some constitutional statutes for the Wyoming State Constitution about parental rights and medical decisions for children and those sorts of things. Could you give us your evaluation? You kind of alluded to some of it, but in light of those constitutional statements, how things were handled and what you would have done differently?
That's a big question.
It is.
So first off, let's start with the pandemic. I think first there was, I'll say this, I'm gonna get my timeline correct. There was denial that it would come to the US. Then it got to the US and there was denial that it would spread so fast. And then there was a scientific community that didn't share what they knew about it. Frankly, members of the National Institute of Health, Fauci, they knew where this came from. They knew it was a lab leak. They knew that it was an engineered virus, but they didn't say that. And that'll eventually get proven out over time, but everybody knows it already without the proof. So that's number one. Number two, Trump did what he could do to get a vaccine out, which was great, but the vaccine should have been an optional, not mandatory. It's untested, it's on an emergency basis. The drug companies are getting paid a ton of money. As taxpayers, we pay them a ton of money. They're immune from any lawsuit. They're immune from anything, any damages whatsoever. So that said, they should have put the information out saying, we recommend you get it, but you're not required to it. I opposed it going to firefighters and military and anything else. It's up to people on their own. There's a lot of people, they didn't know, number one, what the long-term effects are, still don't. And number two, we did find out pretty quickly is if you're a child, you may be a carrier, but you're not at risk of landing in the hospital. And so at the end of the day, pushing it into children, I oppose, and I oppose that greatly. It's up to the parents, not to the schools, to make that decision relative to vaccines. Relative to masks, my brother is a medical physician, and he said to me, he said, you think a mask is gonna stop a virus that's, you know, as small as it is, you're crazy. And it's not. It's what it is a panacea. It's called the obedience mask. Follow our rules, do what we say. So masking up kids isn't going to stop the spread. What it does, all it does is eliminate someone who has COVID from pushing it out further than a few feet because their breath is constrained. But they're still carriers. They're still going to carry it back to their parents. If their parents are vaccinated, they can still get sick. The vaccine just mitigates the amount of illness or the severity of the illness. We lost a lot of people, mainly on the elderly and people that, like me, probably could lose some weight. So those are the people that were at risk. The decisions to shut down the economy, to shut down the restaurants, to shut down the schools, to go to remote learning was a knee-jerk reaction without any scientific evidence that it's going to prove anything. I saw on the news where they had a band, a sixth grade band sitting in giant bubbles playing their instruments. Unbelievable. Are you kidding me? I mean, it's just silliness. So the country went from trying to fight a pandemic to absolute absurdity. And we made some decisions in the state, the governor made some decisions in the state that I don't necessarily agree with, shutting the whole thing down. The county health board shut the thing down, and at the end of the day, the school has to follow the law. If the governor says you're gonna do it, the county health board says you're gonna do it, then I guess you're gonna have to do it. But as soon as, the population can push back on this, then the school needs to go back into the realm of reality and sanity and not the absurdity that was pushed upon it. So I don't know if that answered your question, but it's just a long sordid story that we're all gonna regret.
Yeah. Okay. Anybody else last minute? Okay. So, thank you, Steve, so much
My
for
pleasure.
coming. Thank you.
Thank you.
It's a great opportunity
Yeah.
to, like was pointed out, to actually hear a full answer and not a 30 or 45 second bleep on just kind of a light run over a topic. If anybody wants to ask Steve anything further, we'll let him come on down and he can talk with you one-on-one or as a group, and you don't need to stay very long, but if somebody has something else they wanted to ask or ask privately or something like that, now would be your time to do that.
And I want to thank you all for the invitation and for giving everybody the time to talk, because in the forums, it literally was like 2 minutes and a bunch of questions in 30 seconds. And so this forum is much better, I think, for people to get to understand the candidates. If you like what I have to say, please vote for me. I think there's some good candidates out there. We have 4 positions. We need to make a change. So thank you.
Thank you.